He is the person who stood at this very spot nearly 4 years ago and sent an armed mob to the United States Capitol.
She's going to my philosophy now. In fact, I was going to send her a MAGA hat. She's gone to my philosophy, but if she ever got elected, she'd change it. She's a Marxist. Everybody knows she's a Marxist. Her father's a Marxist professor in economics, and he taught her well.
It's not just about Arab Americans and Muslim Americans. I think a lot of people, including myself, are horrified by what's happening. A lot of people think it's genocide. A lot of people are not afraid of saying that, but their voices are being suppressed, right? We know it across campuses, but it's across the board. It's in private companies. People don't get jobs.
This is someone who is unstable, obsessed with revenge, consumed with grievance, and out for unchecked power.
I heard one of them saying that I do not want my tax money to go and kill people who are like me. There were people who were literally Palestinians, who were Arabs, and even South Asians for that matter. Hello and welcome to The Wire. I'm Arfa Khanam Shevani. As many of The Wire's viewers already know, that I am in the United States right now as part of a journalism fellowship program at the Stanford University in California. It has just been over 2 months that I covered a high-stake elections, the Lok Sabha elections in India, and now when I'm in the United States, it is witnessing one of the highest stakes of elections of its history. There are many people who I heard saying that this perhaps is the most important elections of their lifetimes. The guest with me today is Thomas Hansen. He is the Reliance Dhirubhai Ambani Professor of Anthropology. He founded and directed Stanford Center for South Asia from 2010 to 2017. And he's done significant academic work on not just South Asia, but also India particularly. Do you think that every election, when we say is a historic election, is make or break election, is this election really a make or break election, or you think this is like any other election?
Well, I think it's, thank you for having me and let me talk about this. I think it is a significant election. Whether it is completely a make or break, it remains to be seen. It's certainly an election where you can say that the stakes are very, very high, in that Mr. Trump, who came in first time in 2016 to 20, came in as a bit of a, you can say, a trickster, joker figure, unexpected from the sidelines. It was not completely clear what he stood for and what he wanted. It was not even clear to himself, I think. But this time he has very significant support from the sort of larger conservative movement in the US, which has also become much stronger and much more conservative than it was a few decades ago, and in a very different way than the sort of classic American conservatism we associate with the Republican Party of Reagan and so on, even George Bush. So he's also got very significant support from America's many billionaires, including many of the billionaires here in my neighborhood in Silicon Valley. So the firepower behind him and the plans that have been developed speak to a very decisive moment where there are very strong forces in American society, including the Supreme Court judges on the majority on the Supreme Court, that would like to see many of the rights and legislation and norms that have been sort of making America a more progressive society in some ways in the last 3, 4, 5 decades, since the 60s. And they would like to see much of that rolled back. That's their manifest idea. This is what they talk about. They see America have been through a kind of cultural revolution, as some of the conservatives say, including rights for people of color, expanded migration of people who are not white, rights for sexual minorities, and so on and so forth. And a lot of that is absolute anathema to this group of people, for whom Trump is a kind of front figure. He is maybe a somewhat unruly and undisciplined front figure, but he's a front figure nonetheless, who can gather enough disgruntlement and enough political energy across America from very diverse groups to maybe become a vehicle for this kind of agenda.
I'm getting a sense that you are saying that Donald Trump is actually seems to be getting more support than he did in 2016 when he became the president of the United States for the first time. And the billionaires you're talking about, incidentally, we both are right now residents of the Silicon Valley. The billionaires that you're talking about, is it also the same thing as we would say the Washington Post this time hesitated in declaring or endorsing a presidential candidate? Is this the kind of nervousness that you're feeling in the liberal camp as well? People who stand for, the democracy, the liberal values, constitutional values of United States, or is this just a billionaire trying to control a newspaper?
I think it's both of those things. I think there is nervousness. There's also nervousness among the billionaires, and many of them, of course, not just in Silicon Valley, but across the US. I mean, there's never been a more unequal distribution of wealth in the US than now, just like in India. So this is the age of the billionaires. But I think some of the billionaires, including Jeff Bezos, Amazon owner, is not necessarily casting his lot behind Trump, but I think everybody knows that Trump is very vindictive. He has declared that he has declared war on his enemies, whatever his enemies are, should he get elected. And I think the election is so close, and there's so many signs that they may have a shot at it coming back, that many of the billionaires are nervous about signing up and just supporting the Harris camp because they think it might damage their businesses. I think that's that simple. The owner of LA Times is a man who actually worked with the first Trump administration, so that's maybe less surprising. But yeah, so there is a nervousness. There is also a certain amount of disbelief because you can say that first time Trump was elected, he was an unknown entity. He was like a rabble rouser, a man who would be compared to the old people in the circus and whatever, a bit of a clown, and so you can say many people would have voted for him at that time, maybe without knowing exactly what they voted for, more like a protest vote of a certain kind. There was a lot of racial animus involved in this, as there is this time, because that time it was an election after Obama, and lots of white folks, and America is still a deeply racist society, and lots of white folks were not happy with those years under Obama. They found Obama to be a very a figure that was difficult for them to handle, and obviously extremely clever and well-spoken man who was also a man of color. And I think the same things are happening now with Harris. So you can say, but the difference is that this time Americans are voting for a known entity. There is no one who can say we don't know what Trump stands for. So I think it's peculiar, right? It's peculiar that a man with so many obvious flaws, personally, politically, the way he behaves, what he says, his lying and all that can gather this amount of support. But I think it's about he's more like a foil for lots of people's general dissatisfaction with the way America is developing. Is that because America is becoming more brown and black and diverse and global? Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm an immigrant into the US. I speak with an accent. People notice. Most people where I live come from somewhere else. That's not a problem. But for many Republicans, a state like California, which is a really massive migration state where everybody has come from all over the world, stands for many Republicans as a sign of what America may become. And they don't want that.
Right. So we will discuss about the issues which are dominating beside the personalities, the issues which are dominating these elections, like unemployment, inflation, migration,
Yes.
also the issue of Palestine and
Yes.
the killings of more than 40,000 Palestinian people. But before that, let me understand this phenomena of Donald Trump. As somebody who comes from outside of United States, I'm only a temporary resident here. I used to think that there are many faults in the way Indian democracy functions, and there may not be many takers of liberal, secular, constitutional democracy back home in India. And United States, to someone like me, is a paradise where perhaps millions of people here, they believe in the founding principles of United States. They pride it's themselves on being the oldest democracy of the world. Do you also think it's a generational thing if you try to understand the phenomena of Donald Trump? One of my colleagues here at Stanford, he was telling me that he himself is a true blue liberal in the way we describe it, but his parents and his extended family is going to vote for Donald Trump. And there are people who've never voted. Amongst those people, there are people who have never voted for a Republican candidate. Is this also a generational thing?
I think it is. I think it is. And I think there is a sense of, you can say a form of, I'm searching for the right word, a form of misunderstanding, a form of unease in the older generation about the direction that the country is moving in. It's not just a country, I think it's the world. It's a new world of where people live on social media and through devices, and where identities are much more fluid, and the world is much closer to you than ever before. And that's really unnerving for many of the older generation, for whom exactly America was this kind of a form of place where we knew our basic principles, and this country is for us, right? And they're not so sure about that anymore. And this is what Donald Trump is promising them: certitudes, a certainty that yes, this is we will keep it the way it is, and we will show the rest of the world that we are boss. There's a lot of American nationalism wrapped up in this, right? An experience that America is the global overdog and should become like that. And there are generations here. I mean, forget about the commitment to democracy, which I think is deep, as certainly in some sectors, but there is also a great deal of commitment to America being the dominant power in the world. And I think one of the messages that Trump is selling really effectively is that is slipping. And that is true. It is objectively the case that America is no longer the all-dominant hegemon in the world. And in some ways, we see it every day, the inability and the unwillingness to actually rein in Israel's conduct, for instance, is a clear example, that America doesn't call the shots anymore. So that plays in many directions. I think I will say that lots of scholars have over the years also showed that there is a consistent authoritarian streak in American society. It goes back to the Cold War, even before the Cold War, where lots of people are much more concerned about the sort of threats to their lives and to their livelihood and to their own persons. Don't forget, this is a highly armed society where paranoia of your neighbors or strangers is much higher than it is most other societies. You don't feel it so much in California because we have good gun laws and things like that, at least for now. But in most of the rest of the country, there is a fear of the stranger. So the fear of the migrant, for instance, feeds into this, commitment to the Second Amendment, which gives people right to carry arms. And people really embrace that. So Americans are confident and strong, but they are also paranoid. There's a bunch of scholars who over the years have written about what one historian called Hofstadter wrote in the 60s called the paranoid style in American politics, right? So it's an old affair. And I think what some of that paranoia perhaps reduced in the post-Cold War era, where there was no manifest threat from a clear enemy. Then came 9/11, and now it's the internal enemy. It's the left or the minorities, whatever, that have to be shown their place. Right. So paranoia is back.
Right. So there is a saying that only those people do not value democracy who actually have it. Correct. I was talking to a friend yesterday, and he said he met a security guard who who comes from somewhere in one of the African countries, and he said, I really want Donald Trump to win this election because I want America to experience dictatorship. So this is also one
No
of the
thanks. No thanks.
right. So when we are talking about immigrants and immigration, and we can see white lies coming from, Donald Trump when he talks about the crimes committed by migrants, and he talks about, immigrants eating pets of people, cats and dogs. But then at the same time, I was traveling in Uber last week, and I was talking to this person, my Uber driver. He was a Hispanic, and in my mind, I had this assumption that he would be a voter of the Democratic Party, and he would choose Kamala Harris. And he says that he is, not just him but his entire family is going to vote for Donald Trump because, number one, he's better at handling the economy. Like, he was referring to his last tenure, which actually the facts do not support this claim that he was better at handling the economy. And number two, he said, I'm sick of all the wars that America is, supporting or directly, taking a part in. A Hispanic person who came to United States 40 years ago, who still has people back home there, and he talks to them every day. Would you explain this phenomena of some of Latin Americans, some of the African Americans? Why will they support somebody who's outrightly a racist, a white supremacist? Why would they support someone like Donald Trump?
Well, one that I mean, the isolationist streak in America is also very deep and old. This idea of American exceptionalism, that we are different and we are uniquely prosperous and successful, and we have to protect ourselves from the rest of the world, and the best way to do that is to not get involved, right? And that's been Trump's. I mean, the paranoia and the isolationism seem to go together, right? So I think that and a lot of people who are experiencing perhaps an everyday life, an economic situation that is not very stable, it's not because of Joe Biden. It's because of the way American capitalism works, that there are lots of precarity and lots of precarious jobs. And driving Uber is one sign of that. You can make a good living if you're here, but in many other parts of the country, not so much. So I think this idea that Trump is good on the economy is yes, it's not supported by facts. In fact, there are lots of experts who would say that the Biden administration has done a much better job on the economy. And that's been true of Democratic administrations going back to Clinton and well before that. So whereas the Republicans tend to give enormous tax breaks to the billionaires and generate some of the biggest deficits that has been seen historically, and that's true of all of the Republicans going back to the 1980s. The other thing is that there is, among migrants, there is a sort of what we call it, pull the ladder up mentality, right? I got in, I'm here, I made a life for myself. I don't want any more of those people coming, crossing the southern border to come and threaten my livelihood or threaten my well-being. Wow. So this sort of, you see that in Europe too. You see, for instance, many South Asian migrants who came to Britain and many other parts of Europe a generation or two generations ago. They're very much in favor of a stricter immigration regime, because it's kind of, let's close the door and pull the ladder up so no one else gets in. That is definitely at play here, for sure. The other thing is that there is also a form of simmering dissatisfaction, even rage against many things that's happening. A lot of it has to do with economic insecurity. The way that private equity capital in the U.S. has been basically wrecking the housing market in many ways and many other sectors of the economy. And this is all supported by the Republican Party. But so the idea is that that it's a form of misplaced rage. You can say that people are enraged by the fact that they don't seem to be able to get good jobs, because there are very few good, stable jobs available in this economy anymore. everybody's talking about them. Let's bring more industry back and all that. But even industrial jobs are very precarious. And that's a feature of how the global economy works as a whole. But the rage against it goes against here in this case, those who have been in power the last 4 years, instead of actually looking at what the deeper root causes of what has created this kind of precarity. So I'm not surprised. I've also had conversations with people who belong to the sort of traditional voting bases of the Democratic Party.
Right.
And there was a sense that you know, these people are too fancy, they're too well educated, they're too far away from my concerns. They talk and appear in ways that are very appealing to the Silicon Valley crowd, but maybe not to those who belong to different spheres. America is a very divided society, not just politically, but also ethnically, racially, and so there are many Americas, right? And they have I think the Democrats have had a really hard time bringing everything together, and Kamala Harris is carrying a very heavy burden of having to, is an incumbent without being an incumbent, right? That's the problem.
Question is going to be on Kamala Harris only.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
20 years into the interview, I am getting this sense that this whole, the excess around which this election is revolving is insecurity, whether it is financial or it is political or even social for that matter. So Kamala Harris and his entire party and campaign, it feels like they are making it into an anti-Donald Trump campaign, that if you don't vote for me, what you get is Donald Trump. She calls him, unhinged, and she calls him unstable and who wants unchecked power. But feels like there are not many people who are actually apprehensive about Donald Trump's authoritarian tendencies, which even showed in the last elections. I want to ask you one quick question on Kamala Harris, and then two more questions on American democracy and also Palestine, which I think is a very, very important topic to discuss. What exactly do you think is working in favor of Kamala Harris? Barack Obama, I heard him saying that she is one of you. She comes from middle class. She is not a social elite. So she's going to make policies for you. And you've seen her track record as vice president. So Kamala Harris is ready for the president of the United States, and United States is ready for Kamala Harris. Do you think somebody like Barack Obama, who still is a popular figure in American society, is going to make any difference? Or when he talks about this relatability factor, that she's one of you, does it work?
I think it works to some extent, but the question is who's you, right? One of you. So Kamala Harris is, yes, she's a middle class person. Middle class is a very, like in India, very elastic concept here. Her father is a former professor at Stanford. So, in lots of people's eyes, maybe not so middle class, but little higher than that, depending on how you look at it. So, but there was definitely a relatability factor. She's very charming. She's very quick. She's very relatable in many ways. But she's a Black woman, Black and South Asian heritage, and that in itself is significant for some people. I think we will see a lot of women, a lot of younger women, who are coming out for Kamala Harris very strongly. I think that there is beyond any doubt. We will see a younger generation, younger and more well-educated generation coming out. But the election in the electoral system in the U.S. is structured in such a way that you can have millions and millions of excited people in California voting for her, but at the end of the day, in what we call the electoral college, the votes count for a lot less than they will in smaller states that are more conservative, because of the electoral system it's too complicated to explain here in this short period of time. But there is a structural advantage for the historically white and more conservative states in the U.S. So a Democratic candidate will have to have a lot of support. I think she will get a very high popular vote turnout. Whether that will actually translate into a victory is too early to say. So yes, there is that. I think Obama's endorsement means a lot to those who were part of the Obama coalition, as it's often known. But it's not enough. It's not enough. There has to be that swing vote. There has to be that wave, and it's clearly not the case. I think they have made a real mistake of making this election all about Donald Trump instead of coming out with a clear message of what they want to do. He doesn't have to say anything about what he wants to do. He's a figure that people project all kinds of things into, and he doesn't have to say much. He is just himself, and that's his unique selling point, being himself in his highly imperfect being. That's what he's campaigning on, whereas the Democrats, I think, missed an opportunity to actually talk about the America they want to create.
Right. The lack of idea, the lack of perhaps principles. I can see that already. And you know, I think this is also very typical of people who are already in the government, the incumbency factor, that when you go for re-election, you are maybe lacking in ideas to attract people. Now, quickly, I want to discuss about the Palestine issue. Killing of more than 1,000 people. I was hearing some testimonies from people in Michigan, especially Arab Americans and Muslim Americans, who are saying that they refuse, they refuse to vote for either of the party, whether it's Kamala Harris or Donald Trump. They are voting for the third party, and this is not coming from a clear electoral choice that they are making, but it is a sense of, frustration, a sense of abandonment from the people that they've been traditionally voting for past many decades. I heard one of them saying that I do not want my tax money to go and kill people who are like me. There were people who were literally Palestinians, who were Arabs, and even South Asians for that matter. Amongst South Asian Muslims, I've heard many people expressing this sense of fatigue and bewilderment. And so what do you think it's going to cost the Democratic Party, and especially when they're really kind of on a thin rope they are on?
Frankly, I find it almost incomprehensible. I mean, I find Joe Biden's line on Israel-Palestine beyond belief. I think basically the U.S. has farmed out its Middle East policy to Israel, and that's why they're never going to be reined in. And there are people in the administration who believe that Israel can remake the Middle East, unbelievable as it may sound. But that says more about the so-called American foreign policy elite than it says about but also the Democratic Party is not has I think in this case not listened to a very large proportion of their voters, including people in Michigan, who may well tip the election away from Harris. She could have won Michigan easily, I think, had she done just a few things, having a Palestinian speaker at the convention, or just say a few things, but it's not coming. I think it's because there was also a donor class. The donor class to the Democratic Party is much more conservative than the general Democratic voting base is, and there's a discrepancy, and that's where you see that discrepancy is money talks. I really think that's a part of it, and there's also convention but I think it's not just about Arab Americans and Muslim Americans. I think a lot of people, including myself, are horrified by what's happening. A lot of people think it's genocide. A lot of people are not afraid of saying that, but their voices are being suppressed, right? We know it across campuses, but it's across the board. It's in private companies. People don't get jobs. Lawyers who come out of law school don't get jobs if they were involved, if they have ever written anything, or people's online presence is also being called out sometimes, in private companies, people who don't get promotions or are afraid of losing their job or whatever. So there was a real suppression of dissent on this issue. That's on a magnitude that you sort of have to live here to really get a sense of that. And I think there are questions to be asked about why is that? Why is it that it's okay to have people killed on this scale, and not even that it's almost criminalized even to talk about it? And I think a lot of people are unhappy about this, And the Democratic Party is the guilty party here. It really is.
Right. I think this.
And it will have to pay the price. But I mean, I'm afraid that if the price is that Donald Trump wins, then it's not Americans who are going to pay the heaviest price, but people in the Middle East.
Right. I think this calls for a separate discussion, and I think we can find some time to discuss just the Palestinian issue. But the last question, very quickly, is about the peaceful transfer of power. You think there are apprehensions that if the election doesn't go in favor of Donald Trump, he may not accept the election verdict, and there may not be peaceful transfer of power. There may be violence, instability. Yeah,
I'm quite sure about that. I'm not sure that we'll see a repeat of what happened in 2020 with on Capitol. I don't think that's going to happen because, it's like you always prepare for the war you just fought, right? So there is preparation for that kind of violence from right-wing groups, should they lose. But I think, but we know that there is a very major operation across the country where Republicans have taken over, Republicans who are actually much better organized at the grassroots level than Democrats. And this is an old story. They've been building this up over decades. They have been making major efforts to get seats on all the different commissions and committees that control voting procedures and oversight boards and things like that. So I think we'll see, should they lose, we'll see a whole slew across the country, not in all states, of attempts to invalidate the election results, to say, oh, but there were some missing votes here, or there were some procedures were not followed and whatever. And that's going to happen. I think that is pretty clear. They tried to do it last time to say the election was stolen. They had a bunch of people together, including Giuliani and other people who were basically clowns, sorry to say. They didn't do it well. This time they really have to act together. So I think that if Kamala Harris wins the vote, that vote will be contested. It might well end up in the Supreme Court. And then I think we know what may happen. But so that's why a lot of people are also saying democracy is on the line. It's not just in deep sort of principle terms. It's also in all the little technicalities that are being challenged. And America is a very decentralized society in many ways. So there are many different rules in different states, and they really have mobilized to organize around this and to dominate many of these local boards, especially in small towns, villages, rural areas, and so on. We'll see lots of challenges coming.
Thank
so
you.
That's the worrisome part. That's the most worrisome part.
Right. I know there's a lot to discuss. Thank you very much.
द वायर के और वीडियोस देखने के लिए सब्सक्राइब करें और बेल आइकन पर क्लिक करें। स्वतंत्र पत्रकारिता की आर्थिक मदद करने के लिए डिस्क्रिप्शन में दिए गए लिंक पर जाएं और अपनी राशि चुनें।